Hey guys, really glad you're here. Before we start, I want to mention a couple of quick things. The first being, if you like what you hear, please, by all means, subscribe to us on iTunes. Also, I want to let you know every week I do a short 5 to 10 minute show called Your Driving Force Success Tips. This is where I share with you the most valuable things I've learned about the psychology of success. And most importantly, I really want to hear what you guys think. If you have any comments, questions, or even suggestions for topics or guests you'd like to hear on the show, please let me know. You can email me directly at rod@rodcleef.com. That's rod at RODKHLEIF as in Frank.com. I'd love to hear from you. All right, let's get this party started.
Welcome. This is the Lifetime Cash Flow Through Real Estate Investing podcast. This is where you'll learn strategies to help you achieve lifetime financial freedom through real estate investment. Your host, Rod Cleef, has owned over 2,000 homes and apartments, and he brings experts in all aspects of real estate investment and management onto the show. Now, here's your host, Rod Cleef.
Welcome to another edition of How to Build Lifetime Cash Flow Through Real Estate Investing. I'm Rod Cleef, and I'm very glad you're here. I know you're going to get tremendous value from the gentleman we're interviewing today. His name is Doug Chasick, and he has over 35 years of hands-on property management experience. He began his career as a resident manager for a 524-unit apartment property, and since then he's been responsible for portfolios as large as 28,000 apartments. So he's an accomplished speaker, author. He's published numerous articles in every multifamily related genre you can think of. He's spoken many times at the National Apartment Association and numerous other large organizations. He's received many awards, including he was a 2010 recipient of the Apartment Career and Education Award for Professional Educators, given by the National Apartment Association. And I could literally go on and on and on. So I'll let him tell you a little bit more about himself. Without any further ado, my guest today is Doug Chasick. Doug, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. I hope that everyone listening can hear my blushing because I'm redder than an apple. So thank you very much for that.
Well, I could have, like I said, I could have kept going. So maybe we can start, Doug, by having you tell us a little bit about your background and expand on some of the things I said, how you got started in a 524-unit building or complex, and maybe just expand on that a little bit.
Okay. Well, in a universe far away in a time long ago, I had gotten divorced and had never lived in an apartment before, and moved into this apartment community, North Isle Club and Apartments. I'll never forget it. 524 studios and one bedrooms in Coram, Long Island, and it was a swinging singles complex. This was before the Fair Housing Amendments Act of 1988, so adult communities were illegal. And I was working at Herman's World of Sporting Goods at the time in retail, and they needed a social director. This place had a licensed bar on the premises, 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools, lighted clay tennis courts. It was amazing, and no children.
Wow.
No children. Oh, and did I mention that I had just gotten divorced?
Yeah, no, I'm getting the general vibe here. You know, you got divorced and they needed a social coordinator. How better to meet ladies than becoming a social coordinator? Awesome.
You know, so I struggled through it, and I got this free apartment. Believe me, I learned quickly. I wasn't writing a check, but it wasn't free. And right. I got a salary, and I was still working at Herman's. And then one day, Brenda, she was the manager. She was from West Virginia. She drives up to the office. She's in her pickup truck. She comes storming into the office. She's carrying a cardboard banker's box, empty. And, you know, I say I'm a pretty worldly guy, but up to that point, I had never heard anyone construct entire sentences using only the F word and New Yorkers. And she proceeded to rant her way through the office, emptied her desk into this banker's box, walked back out, still swearing, got in her truck and left. We never saw her again. So a couple of days later, Chuck Chuck R. from the home office came up. He was the regional vice president, interviewed everybody, and through the process of elimination, I guess, decided I was the best qualified guy to babysit while I found a manager. And I said, okay. So I left Herman's, and I've been doing it ever since.
Wow. Well, I know now you literally consult with very, very large operators, and I'm going to ask you about some things that really would apply to any size portfolio. I don't care if somebody's got a duplex, or 100 units or 30 units or 50 units or whatever.
Sure.
The things that we're going to talk about really apply to anybody that's in the multifamily space, or even single family for that matter, that's leasing property. And I think I'd like to start with something that I know you're very knowledgeable about, and something that people need to know. It's not the most fun topic, and it's not, it's a fairly technical topic, but there's a lot of common sense in it, and that is fair housing. What do people need to be careful of so they don't get in trouble and get sideways with these very onerous regulations? So maybe you could speak to that.
Sure. The first thing that we all have to accept is that fair housing ain't fair. Fair housing was never meant to be fair. Fair housing was about equal. And I can summarize the entire Fair Housing Act in 2 sentences. The Fair Housing Act, as amended, requires us, number one, to offer an equal opportunity to buy or lease a home to anyone who's qualified, and number two, for that person to have equal enjoyment of the home that they bought or leased. That is the essence of fair housing. So there are some things about fair housing that don't seem or sound or look fair and yet are legal. And where people get into trouble, regardless of whether they're managing a duplex or whether they're managing a 1,000-unit multifamily neighborhood community, is we have to stop voting on what we think and go by what we know. It's, as Sergeant...
Could you expand on that a little bit? Could you expand on that a little bit? Because I didn't understand what you meant by that.
Okay, I'm sorry. So in other words, somebody comes in, you're talking to somebody who's going to rent your apartment home. Again, whether it's in a duplex or whether it's in a 100-unit community. And they come in and they say, oh, by the way, my dog will be living here with me. And they say, and you say, well, we don't allow pets. And they say, no, it's not a pet. And you say, well, I don't care what it is, we don't allow dogs. Bingo, you just violated the Fair Housing Act potentially. Because if that person has a disability and the disability is visible, then no, we can't ask them for any kind of proof that they need the animal. If the disability is not visible, then we can ask them to prove that they need an animal, not why, just that they need it. And it doesn't matter if they look like they need it or they sound like they need it or that the proof is from a chiropractor or a home health care nurse. We have to allow it. And it's at that point, it has nothing to do with a pet policy. It has to do with that the Fair Housing Act as amended requires us to make an accommodation, a change in our policies and procedures in order to meet that second part of the definition, that they have the right to equal enjoyment. And that's where a lot of folks get in trouble because they say, oh, well, you don't look like you need the animal, or they just say, I don't care what it is, I don't allow animals. They lose, and it gets really expensive.
Now, I've even heard, on an aside, I've heard horror stories about people that actually will go out and bait landlords into breaking the law, maybe record them or whatever, and for financial gain. Have you seen that? Constantly. Absolutely. No kidding.
Oh, yeah. There's fair housing testers out there. Some of them are advocacy groups, and they are out there with the most noble purpose, which is to make sure that everyone has an equal opportunity to live in a nice place. And there's other folks where it's a cottage industry, where they go out there knowing that if I have a choice between giving you $2,000 to go away without admitting any guilt or paying my attorney $300 an hour to challenge the assertion that I discriminated, I'm probably going to write the check and just say,
wow,
go away. Oh, yeah, there's mooches out there. Here's the good news. Based on my experience, they represent less than 5% of everything, because it's not in the introduction, but in my spare time, I work as a expert witness for fair housing cases, but for landlords, not for tenants.
Sure. Now, how can you tell someone what does someone need to do to not get run afoul of these regs? I mean, is there some, easy way to make sure that you never, are in violation?
No.
Okay.
There isn't. However, there are certain things you can do to minimize the possibility of being named and to minimize the damage if you are named. And the first one is to take a fair housing course. There are plenty of courses out there. You can go to NAA or IRM or NARPM or your local board of realtors, or you can go online. There's just literally dozens and dozens of courses. Find a 2 to 3 hour course, go through it, learn the basics, and make certain that everyone you hire that's going to talk to prospects or tenants completes the course. That is the first line of defense. Second of all, treat fair housing as a risk management issue, so that you are looking at, okay, what could happen? Now, are you going to get shopped? It's very rare for the smaller owner-operator to get shopped. They're usually after the big fish with the deep pockets. However, you still want to make certain that you know enough about the fair housing law that you get everything in writing, everything is documented, and that before you say the word no, you look at, all right, well, maybe, somebody's going to say, well, my aromatherapist says I need this ferret. And instead of saying, are you serious? We say, I'm happy to consider your request. Let's sit down and let me get some details from you. Because, again, the biggest error we make is to just flat out say no, or to say, why do you need it? We're not allowed to ask why. We're only allowed... You're
not even allowed to ask wow. Wow.
No. What you're allowed to ask is, here's what I recommend to everybody. You want to have a form that goes to the healthcare provider or caregiver. It does not have to be a medical doctor. It just has to be the person who is providing care for the person who says they're disabled. And you want to have 3 questions. You never want the prospect or the tenant to bring the form in. You want to send it to the person who's going to vouch for him. And it's going to have 3 questions. Question number 1, does this person meet the definition of disability as contained in the Fair Housing Act? Which you can go to HUD.gov, G-O-V, and get the Fair Housing Act. Question number 2, does this person require an accommodation or modification? An accommodation, change in the rules, modification, change in the premises, like wider doorways or a ramp. And if they require it, what do they require? Number 3, do you swear that the information you have provided is true and accurate? That's it.
Okay.
Usually, if you got somebody who's going to hustle you when they see that 3rd question, they go, okay, I'm not filling this out.
Okay. Now, let me
live in Florida, which is the prescription pet capital of the world. And half the animals I see are walking around wearing a vest that says they're a service animal companion. It's crazy.
Right. Yeah. No, I'm in Florida as well. You see it a lot.
Okay.
And now let's talk about something else. So animals. You even said ferret. Holy cow! So you really have to be careful out there, guys, with stuff like this. Let's talk about disability for a minute. It's been a long time since I've explored the regs for disability, but it's my understanding if someone that's disabled comes to you and they need an accommodation, to the extent of even making modifications to your property, could you speak to that? I don't want to guess at what the new regs are. Okay.
Well, the new regs really are applying more to the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is now called the Americans with Disabilities Act as amended. And that only applies to a public area, an area of public accommodation. So if you're running a small deal, if you're running scattered site single-family homes, you don't really have a public area unless you have a central office. So really, for most of your listeners, I'm guessing that.
Well, no, some of them will have some of them will have apartments with interior hallways. So let's use that as an example. What could you have to do there?
Interior hallways are considered private property. The public.
Oh.
If you're not a resident or a guest, that's a private hallway. Only areas where you invite the public. So on a couple 100-unit community, it would be just a leasing center. It wouldn't be the parking lot or the pool or the clubhouse. Just the leasing center where we invite the public. So here's what you want to know about disability. There's a definition of what constitutes a disability, and then it says that if a person needs an accommodation or a modification, that if it's reasonable, we must approve it, and if it's not reasonable, we can deny it, but we must approve any reasonable alternative. And the way the law defines reasonable is that it does not create an undue administrative or financial burden, and it does not fundamentally alter the way you do business. So if let's just say you were renting townhomes, and they were walk-up townhomes, no elevators. Somebody in a wheelchair wants to live there, but they want an elevator. Well, first of all, unless you are fully federally funded, like a Project 8, Section 8 deal, the resident or the prospect pays the cost of the modification. So it's not an expense for you. However, is it reasonable? What if this is a 35-year-old townhome and the vibration, because if it's a 2-story townhome, it's going to be a piston elevator. The vibration is going to damage the building, and you don't have the electrical service. And you might say, hey, you know what? I can't do it. I'm going to deny it. Well, what's a reasonable alternative? Well, if all you have are 2-story walk-up townhomes, the only alternative is to live somewhere else. If you were in a garden-style apartment community and they wanted to live on the second floor and put in an elevator, you could offer them a first floor. By the way, here's more bad news. Even if you have crossed every T and dotted every I and done everything exactly according to Hoyle, the person can still file a complaint and we still have to defend ourselves. That's why you want to document everything.
Let me ask you this. Let's say somebody's got, a quad or 8 units. They're all on one level, and a handicapped person wants to rent there, and they want to widen the doors or want us to widen the doors. Are they allowed? Do we have to do it on our dime, or are they? Do they need to pay for it if they want to make that sort of of an accommodation, put in ramps, widen doors, etc.?
Okay, two answers. Anything interior, any modification the customer pays for. So whether it was a doorway or grab bar or a ramp, they pay for it. Now, having said that, do we want a guy to go down to Home Depot, rent one of those portable cement mixers, and start pouring a ramp or doing a curb cut? So the law says they got to pay for it, but then the business decision says, you know what? I'm going to do it, and I'm either going to charge them or I'm not going to charge them, because here's a little twist. A guidance memo published by HUD and the Department of Justice says that even though the resident pays for the modification, if that modification benefits anyone other than the resident, then the owner must maintain it.
Okay.
So
I got it. Yeah.
For my own ramps.
Now let me ask you this. No, and again, this is for people that don't know anything about dealing with disabled. You can't tell them no, correct? I mean, if they come to you and they're disabled and they want to on their dime make some modifications to your property. Correct me if I'm wrong. You can't reject them for that reason. Is that, or could you expand on that question?
You can't reject them if the alteration is reasonable. So putting in a wider doorway, listen, I'm a pretty big guy. I love wider doorways. All right, putting in grab bar, no problem. However, what if they're confined to a wheelchair? They want to lower the kitchen cabinets. Well, they are allowed to do that. However, the law also says that when they leave, if the alteration, the modification that they made would interfere with our ability to release the home, then it's their responsibility to put it back to its original condition. So you're never going to be able to get somebody to put the narrower doorway back in. But if they have lowered the kitchen cabinets, not only can you require them to put them back, but you could even have them establish an escrow so that you knew the funds were there to put them back.
That was my next question. Yeah, what if they bolt and then you're stuck with it? So you can actually require an escrow up front. Well, that is good news. Okay, that's a good tip right there, guys. I hope you heard that. Okay, all right. Well, that was all very good information. Let's shift gears for a minute. Now let's talk about managing property and really the resident experience. What is your view on how to treat your residents, regardless of the size of the property?
I think that the best way to treat your residents is what someone, not me, although I wish I had thought of it, someone calls the platinum rule. We all know the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Treat others as you would like to be treated. And that's a great rule to live by mostly. However, it's also, if you listen to it closely, treat everyone like you want to be treated. It's kind of selfish and self-centered. So somebody came up with the platinum rule: do unto others as they want to be done unto. Treat other people the way they want to be treated. Although I am not completely invested in this whole generational thing, there are certain things that are true. For example, the millennials, the current youngest generation, their preferred method of communication is texting, followed by email, followed by phone calls. The thing they hate the most is face-to-face. So if you're trying to go face-to-face with a millennial, it's probably not going to be a pleasant experience. Whereas I'm a boomer, I love face-to-face. I text only by necessity.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. Now, as it relates to, so if I'm hearing you correctly, if you've got millennials as residents, are you saying communicate with them the way they want to be communicated?
Absolutely. Excuse me, with this caveat. If you are texting with them or if you are phone calling with them, that's great, but document everything. Document everything. There is a way to save your texts, or you could even do something as simple as taking a screenshot, or just write a memo to file that on March 4th at 1:30 you texted with Doug, and here's the content of the text. Boom, boom.
Okay. So that you'd spoke to how to communicate, but the overall resident experience, can you speak to that a little bit? I mean, how do you treat them like gold? Do you just take care of what needs to be taken care of? What's your philosophy on, resident relations, tenant relations?
Well, first of all, I do not believe in under-promising and over-delivering. I do not believe in giving it 110%. I think more than ever, people are focused on getting their money's worth. Unless you are managing a property that's an affordable property where there's a voucher involved or where there's some sort of a subsidy, people want their money's worth. When people say that the price is too high, that's not a price objection. That's a value objection. They're saying, I don't see the value. I don't think it's worth it. So my advice is always to give somebody their money's worth. Whatever you advertise, deliver on. And treat that customer as the person who is improving your asset, growing the value of your asset. And we all know that it is better and less expensive to retain than it is to replace. So let me first of all back up just a little bit and talk about the absolute necessity of having just an iron-clad checking routine to make sure that the person that applies is the person that you want in there. That you qualify the person, you do all the checks, the background checks, the criminal background, the credit, the landlord history. You know, one of the things I learned over the years is very true, is that the best indicator of future performance is past performance. And I would take a conversation with your last landlord over your FICO score any day of the week, because your FICO score doesn't tell me anything. Your last landlord tells me everything. So I think we need to actually go backwards a little bit and go back to the days when, some of us remember this, Rod, that we would pick up the phone and call the other landlord. You know?
Remember it well, and actually take it one step further. Make sure they were actually the landlord.
Yeah.
You know, you get a lot of relatives sometimes, you know, to actually do a property search, make sure they own that property. Or I always preferred institutional previous landlords, you know, apartment complexes, things of that nature, versus a single, you know, just people. Because if you're relying heavily on that landlord verification, you got to make sure they're really the landlord.
Absolutely.
But I agree with you.
Absolutely. And then once you get them in there, give them what they paid for. I think that today, the greatest gift you can give somebody is the gift of your undivided attention. That when somebody calls you or texts you or contacts you, that you focus on them, find out what they want, and then be honest with them. Get rid of the word can't and talk about what you will and you won't do. Too often, people say can't as the general, well, too bad, sorry, that's life. No, own it and let people know. I truly believe that being authentic, being genuine, being straight up with people is something that will make you a more desirable landlord than the next guy who's just going to bury people. I was at a store the other day that shall remain nameless, and they told me about their policy. And all I was asking was to redeem something they sent to me, except it was in my wife's name. And they said she has to be there to redeem it, but it's a business account. We're both on it. And after about 2 minutes, I just said fine and walked out. And, you know, I'm not going to be back there anytime soon, and I'm going to let people know what store it was and what happened. And they don't get it.
Sure.
You know, in the old days, I don't know if you remember, but here was the deal. When you had a bad experience, you told 7 people, and those 7 people told 7 other people, and those 7 people told 7 other people, and then people got bored and did something else. Today, you have a bad experience, you go on Yelp.com or ApartmentRatings.com, and you tell 7 million people. And don't think the rest of the planet isn't. I hate to say it. You know, I'm celebrating a birthday. I already gave away, I'm a boomer. And I do not buy anything without checking the reviews. I'm sorry, I do.
Most people don't. And many people will watch videos about the product or service that they're thinking about considering, and that videos are becoming very huge. In fact, let me segue from let's talk to marketing for a second. What role or what suggestions can you make for somebody with again, regardless of the size property, that could help them in marketing effectively and getting lots of people to view their vacancies?
Well, a couple of things that I've learned. First of all, most social media does not rent property. The value of most social media is to keep the folks who are there. But people don't go on Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn when they want to rent an apartment. They go on Craigslist, or they go to one of the numerous apartment sites to search. And believe it or not, some people go to Publix and Winn-Dixie and they pull the rental guide out of there, and some people even look in the newspaper. So here's what I've learned over the years is that through no intentionality, the folks that end up living with us are like the folks who already live with us. So I say make sure that you know everything about who your current tenants are, where they came from, where they work, where they shop, where they play, and then market where they are, because that's where the next one is probably going to come from.
Well, that is very valuable advice. I hope you guys really heard that, because you're absolutely right. Birds of a feather, they people want to be around people like them. So if you know where they shop and where they hang out and what they do, those are the places you can target. Those are words of wisdom. Now, let me ask you this. from an educational or training standpoint, what would you recommend for a multifamily operator, again, regardless of the size, to train them in some of these things? You already mentioned to do a fair housing, 2 to 3 hour fair housing workshop, which is great advice. It's been years since I've done one, actually decades since I've done one. And then what else about management or the multifamily space would you recommend?
Well, depending on the size of the operator, for somebody who's a larger operator in terms of the number of units, who's up there over 100 units, the National Apartment Association has over 160 affiliates spread out throughout the country. For smaller operators, you've got NARPM, National Association of Residential Property Managers, which is a very, very vibrant, active resource, a great association. And by the way, if you participate with any of these folks, I don't get a toaster, okay? So, and then...
No, I appreciate it.
And in some areas, the Board of Realtors can be very helpful. Although one of the things, depending on the area, again, here's what to remember. One size does not fit all. So you may have had a bad experience in Bradenton, but then you go across the bay to Tampa, and everything's wonderful. So I would also check out the local Board of Realtors. And the next thing after a fair housing class would be a Landlord Tenant Act refresher. And usually you find that with one of the schools that offers continuing ed courses for real estate salespeople and real estate brokers. So just make sure you're up to speed on what your local Landlord Tenant Act requires, particularly with regard to if you're going to keep a secured deposit, if you're going to charge for damages, if you're going to make deductions. Find out what you're allowed to do with regard to background checks and making sure that you're in compliance with FCRA and FACTA, and just a little bit of law. And by the way, on the subject of law, I also want to remind everybody that a great landlord-tenant attorney is not necessarily a great fair housing attorney. Sometimes you need two people to do that. After that,
that's very good advice.
I would just look at what your market is. If you are in a market where it's urban and people are considering things like your walkability index, and you have a younger millennial kind of crowd where they're not driving, then maybe you take a course on social media use from the local community college, or go online and go to lynda.com or Udemy.com and take a course on social media, not to lease apartments, but to just be active and be out there, and to also be able to go on Yelp and see what are people saying about you.
Right, and be able to respond and whatnot.
So Google alert on your name and on your company name and on your properties, and monitor what's going on out there in the ethosphere.
Yeah, everybody should have Google alerts set for their personal name, for the name of their, if they have an apartment community or communities, their apartment names, and be monitoring what's being said publicly, because I can tell you it can have a huge impact on your ability to get residents. So that's very, very good advice. Well, can you tell us a war story? I'm sure you've got a bunch of them, but I know I've got some doozies from my management experience. Can you think of a doozy for us, and maybe what you learned from it?
When you say that, I'm going to tell you the first thing that popped into my head. It was a case that a couple of attorneys called me and asked me if I would participate as the expert witness in defense of their client, a landlord. And it was about the newest area of focus for HUD and the Department of Justice, which is folks who have hearing disabilities. That has now supplanted hoarding as the number one issue. And
has supplanted what? I didn't quite catch that. It supplanted hoarding. Hoarding. Wow, I hadn't even heard about that.
Oh yeah, hoarding.
Okay.
Hoarding is now a recognized disability.
Wow. I've never heard that one before. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
all right.
if you have a
disability,
hoarder, HUD requires you to to do what they call interactive meetings and bring in social agencies and try to resolve the issue prior to evicting them for creating a fire hazard or sanitation situation. Oh yeah, it gets pretty interesting.
Wow. Okay. So go back to your story.
Okay.
Sorry.
So this particular community, and this was a guy who owned a lot of small units, some duplexes, and operated them from a central office. And they had testers, fair housing testers, recorded with the leasing person saying, hey, call me back when you have somebody who can call. Call me back when, I don't even know what an IP relay is, okay? So call me back when you have somebody who can hear better. This is recorded. Needless to say, and it was a $250,000 claim. I told them to settle, that I would not work with them, and that they needed to settle. They settled for $75,000 and were griping about it, and I told them they should offer a week's worth of sacrifices to the gods if they got off that easily. And so that's my most recent war story. And to this day,
okay, so let me ask you this.
Upset that he has to deal with it. Here's the thing.
Let me ask you this. Okay, I'm sorry. Well, I got to ask you. I mean, my question's going to be, how do you what could you have done in that situation? Because I'm not sure I would have handled it any differently. Or people that aren't aware of that nuance, that you can't say call me back with someone that can hear me. I don't know what would you say to someone in that situation.
They identified themselves as being an IP relay person,
hearing impaired,
and that they were hearing impaired.
Okay,
they were calling on behalf of somebody who was hearing impaired. Because they don't use the typewriter thing. I forget what you call it now. It's been a while. So now they use IP relay. The way to do that is don't automatically think it's a prank call or a sales call. If it's a bad connection, be respectful. Let the person know that I'm sorry, I can't understand. Can I call you back, or can we communicate some other way right now to establish a connection? I'm having difficulty understanding what you're saying, in a respectful manner. I know it's frustrating, I got it, but you can't let it show anymore. You get tagged for it.
Wow. So for those of you listening, obviously it's not just enough for you to know this stuff, because he was speaking about somebody's leasing agent that this war story happened with. It's important that everybody that you have working with you that's dealing with tenants knows this stuff. So hope you guys are getting that. It's very scary stuff. $75,000 hit for just really somebody being rude on the telephone.
And let's extend it a little further, please. How many of your listeners are sending in repair people, or sending in pest control people, or sending in other, well, as far as the Fair Housing Act goes, whatever they say, whatever they do, you are responsible for. There is no such thing as a fair housing do-over. There's no fair housing mulligan. There's no, I didn't mean to say that. Intention has nothing to do with it. It's all about impact. So when you're letting vendors and suppliers and maintenance people go in to interact with your customers, whatever they say or do, ultimately you're responsible for, period.
Now I gotta ask you something, because you said the word vendors. So you're telling me a vendor as well? I mean, if you hire somebody to go in on a contract basis, you can get dinged for them.
Guy. They're there with your permission. Now, if it's the pizza delivery guy, you're off the hook.
No, but what if you send in a plumber? Send in a plumber that you just called in the yellow pages, or not the yellow pages any longer. That dated me. But you call a plumber and have them go do some work on a property. They can get you in trouble?
They had a fair housing class and they were taking notes. Yes, sir.
Wow. Holy cow. Well, guys, those of you listening, we weren't trying to scare the heck out of you here. Yeah, we're trying to scare the heck out of you here, but forewarned is forearmed, or forearmed is forewarned, and so you really need to bone up on this stuff and make sure that the people working with you are as well. Well, we're getting near the end of the show, and Doug, I was hoping you could maybe leave my listeners with one last little bit of advice, one piece of wisdom. What could you say that maybe a little golden nugget?
I would say that we all have the opportunity. We provide housing to people, and we have the opportunity to make a big difference in their lives and not to squander that opportunity. I look at it as a privilege. I mean, this is not easy work. People either love doing this or they don't come back from lunch on the second day. So I would say to appreciate and remember the impact that we have on other people's lives. When I was doing affordable housing, people would cry when they walked into their apartment because they had never lived in anything that nice. And I mean, that's a real gift that we have to be able to do this. And I know it can be annoying, and I know it can be tiresome, and I know we got to deal with mooches and people who are trying to pick our pocket. But ultimately, that's all out there. Let's not forget what a great opportunity we have to make a difference in other people's lives. It's pretty cool, I think.
Very nice, very nice. Well, listen, Doug, I want to thank you very much for being on the show today. You added some very important and valuable information to my listeners, and I hope we can stay in touch and keep an eye on what we're doing individually. And so thank you so much for your time, and appreciate it.
You're very welcome. It was my pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Lifetime Cash Flow Through Real Estate Investing podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, please subscribe and then take a moment to visit iTunes and leave a 5-star rating and review. For more resources to connect with us further, please visit our website at lifetimecashflowpodcast.com. Tune in next week for our next show.